In today's gospel reading, John the Baptist sends two of his disciples to our Lord to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" When we read this passage, people sometimes wonder, did John the Baptist doubt the identity of Christ? Isn't it John the Baptist who pointed out who Christ was? Isn't it John the Baptist who initially sent some of his disciples to follow after our Lord? So why would John doubt? And this is one of the questions that was raised in the question and answer session. So it is a question that I have dealt with, but it's good to review it nevertheless. So John wasn't doubting, but his disciples were doubting. So the disciples of John, they had such great faith in John. They believed that he was the Holy One, that perhaps even that he was the Messiah. So they stuck with him. Whereas John wanted to send them to follow after Christ, but they refused to go because they just didn't believe that Christ was the one. Now they hear rumors or they hear stories of what Christ is doing. So the disciples of John reported to him all that Jesus was doing, but they still don't believe. So they just don't accept it. So John sends two of his disciples, and when the two disciples, they return, they relate to John and the other followers of John that, what Christ said, "Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have the good news brought to them, and blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." So not only initially they only heard these stories of Christ doing all these miracles, but now they were able to witness it themselves. And so they go back with great enthusiasm, and they're convinced that Jesus is indeed the Messiah, the one that they should be following. I wanted to draw your attention to that verse in today's gospel reading where it says that John summoned two of his disciples and sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" And this verse is actually repeated, so when they go to Christ, they actually say, "John sent us. Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" What were they waiting for? Now, we all know the Jewish people were waiting for the Messiah, but I wanted to kind of pose this question to ourselves. Not so much what are we waiting for? Yes, we're waiting for Christ to return at the end of time to establish the fullness of his kingdom. But imagine just people living in the world, not so much waiting for, but what is their desire? So for example, regarding the coronavirus situation for many people, their present desire or what they are waiting for is for an end to the pandemic. For some people, maybe they're waiting for the coronavirus vaccine, thinking that that will just solve all the problems. But there might be another virus or another pandemic of sorts. So there's always going to be problems. But not just in regards to the coronavirus situation, but in general. What are people in general waiting for or desiring? In other words, what do they desire out of life? What are they waiting for? What are they striving for? What do they hope to get out of life? Now, of course, if you ask somebody who's religious-minded and someone who's an atheist, they're going to come up with different answers. But I kind of wanted to focus on what atheists desire, what they are waiting for. And when it comes to atheists, they don't believe in life after death, most of them anyways. They don't believe in God. As I mentioned yesterday, they don't believe in the fact that there's an objective moral law that we are all called to obey. And they often resent the church, in particular the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is the one that kind of states clearly what the moral law is, what is right and what is wrong. And that's not something that atheists like. They want to be free to do their own thing. They want to be their own God in many ways. So what are they waiting for? Well, they're waiting for this kind of absolute freedom, we could say, where they're not accountable to anyone, perhaps not even to society. maybe atheists wouldn't go that far. Many of them say, well, standards of morality are determined by the group of people living at this time, and as we go from one generation to the next, moral standards will change. So previously it was wrong to smoke marijuana, but now it's okay, and all these other things. So that's often what they believe. Now, of course, I'm sure they also desire happiness. Now, happiness is the ultimate desire of every human being, but I'm just thinking for the things of this world, what do atheists desire? Well, they might desire wealth, they might desire fame, yes. So many things, all those things that they believe is going to make them happy, possessions. And of course, good relationships. But is an atheist able to bring about all these things on their own? Or does an atheist believe that if everyone were atheists, that all these things could come about? And even if atheists lived in a society where there were no laws, no rules, how would they get along with people? I mean, it's all right if you say, okay, well, I'm going to justify stealing or lying or even murder, but what if others are doing the same thing and they're going to be doing it towards you? Are you going to be happy about it? Probably not. And, they desire all these things, but, even if they have freedom to commit sin, let's say, for example, sexual type sin, well, how about the consequences? So is it not true that when people sleep around, they're more likely to get sexually transmitted infections or diseases, to get unwanted pregnancies, to have broken hearts, to have conflicts in relationships, to lose the trust of, let's say, your spouse? So in other words, there's consequences to sin. So, if atheists really thought about it, they would want to do away with all the consequences of sin also. But it's an objective reality. It's a fact that these things happen. So when we see people acting freely and disobeying God's laws, we sometimes see horrible, horrible crimes being committed, sometimes against very young children. So is a free society, freedom in the sense that an atheist thinks of freedom, is that really good? And the answer is no. Now, we would argue that true freedom is only the freedom to do what is right and just. So anything that is unjust is not really freedom, but it's really kind of permission to do evil. And that's not real freedom, we would say. So a person who chooses to do those things, they're kind of enslaved by their passions, by their desires, and they don't know what is truly good. So the point I'm trying to make is, what is it that we desire? What is it that we long for? And when it comes to atheists, yes, there's the consequences of sin, but there's also the reality that we get old. We have injuries, we get hurt, we get diseases, there's the coronavirus, there's sexually transmitted infections. Wouldn't it be nice to do away with all these things? And in fact, wouldn't it be nice to do away with death also? Now, it's true, some people are so depressed and so down they might desire death, which is very, very unfortunate. So when we believe in God, when we do good, we feel good about ourselves and we have something to hope for. So what is my point? My point is that if we look at the world from the perspective of an atheist and what an atheist desires, ultimately what they really desire is someone like Christ who will save them from their sins and save them from the miseries of this world, whether it's, being blind or crippled or lame or disease or even death. So Christ does away with all these things. And when John the Baptist sends his disciples and they see Christ doing all these things, these are signs of the presence of the kingdom, signs of the presence of the Messiah. Now, Christ didn't heal everyone. And in fact, even today, not everyone is healed through miracles, but miracles do happen. So it's only at the end of time that Christ will heal everyone. So at least those who are with God in heaven, you will no longer be blind if you are presently blind. You will no longer be lame. There will be no more diseases. There will be no more tears. There will be no more sin in heaven. There will be no more negative consequences of sin. In other words, we will live in the ideal world where we all love each other and get along with each other, which is something that we should desire. So John the Baptist had his disciples. They were unwilling to leave him, but John wanted them to see things from a different perspective, and that's why he sends two of them to Christ so they will come back and report. And in this world today, there are many individuals who are disciples of philosophers or ways of life. You know, they follow a certain manner of living. You know, I mentioned yesterday that my nephew's teacher is saying that modern philosophers say, well, there's no objective reality, there's no objective truth, and certainly no objective morality, or absolute truth or absolute morality. And that's false. And there are modern philosophers who argue against that position. So unfortunately, many people, even Catholics, buy into these philosophies and become disciples of these philosophers. And these philosophers have an influence on the world and the outlook of the world. And these philosophers influence people's beliefs. And it's one of the reasons why there are so many atheists in the world today. So philosophy, what people are taught in the schools and in the universities, but also what the media portrays. So whose disciple are we? So the ideal is that we too become fully the disciples of Christ. Not just that we hear about the things that he has done or is doing. And you know, when we consider what Christ did during the time of John, Christ continues to do that through his mystical body, which is the church. So we have all kinds of miracles happening in the church, you know, in every age. Just think of Saint Andre Bessette in the last century. He died, I think, in 1937 or 38, and thousands of miracles which he all attributed to Saint Joseph. By the way, it's the year of Saint Joseph this year, so the Holy Father has declared a year of Saint Joseph. We're very fortunate. We have the greatest shrine to Saint Joseph here in America. So Christ continues to do these miracles. All of these things point to the reality that the Catholic Church is the true church established by Christ. And the Catholic Church, even though it is made up of sinners, contains the fullness of the truth that sets us free from all our miseries. In other words, everything that we are desiring, everything that even atheists are desiring, is contained in the truth revealed by Christ. Yes, the problem is sometimes I or others are not as good at communicating those truths, and sometimes we're a bad example, we're bad Christians. That's true for all of us. But when we look at the Catholic Church, not only are we able to find the truth, but we also see individuals like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or think of Saint Damien of Molokai, who volunteered to go and work in a leper colony on an island that was totally isolated. And once he went there, he was not allowed to come off that island, and basically it was a death sentence for him. But he willingly did that out of love for those poor lepers. So we have individuals like that, and so many others, St. Francis of Assisi, and we could go on and on and on. So let us be truly disciples of Christ, not just hearing or being aware of the things that he has taught, but true followers of him, and also individuals who will proclaim these truths to everyone around us.